So our next speaker is Skylar Franke. Skylar is the counselor for Ward 11. She, prior to being elected as counselor, she worked in the environmental sector and was previously the executive director at the London Environmental Network, and she worked for Reforest London. And Skylar is going to talk about how we all need services, including seniors. So welcome, Skylar, and thank you.
Thank you so much, and I'm so glad to be here, and nice to see everyone who's here tonight and see some familiar faces. Okay, we're good, we got it. Here we go. All right, I'm gonna start from the beginning, slideshow. Perfect. So before we get started, I want to kind of contextualize where London budget sits. And some of the recommendations I'll be making apply to seniors, but they actually apply to anyone who lives in the community. But seniors is one of those specific demographics that I want to talk a little bit about, because if you follow municipal politics or really any politics, one of the main reasons why politicians won't raise property taxes is because, and it's a very specific narrative, but specifically because seniors are on fixed incomes. If you increase property taxes, they might be priced out of their home because, you know, they're already stretching their budget so thin. An increase in 2% on their property tax might be the difference that kicks them out of the house, and then they become homeless. And while I don't disagree that that actually probably does happen and might happen if we increase taxes, I personally maybe get 2 to 3 emails that say that a year, and it's not overwhelming. So I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm just saying based on those 2 to 3 emails that politicians receive, that entire narrative becomes almost the foundation of saying why we can't raise taxes. So that is one of the things I just wanted to discuss a little bit, because I know everyone is in a different economic system or situation, and I know that everyone is right now struggling with affordability. I know I am. I know I'm sure many of you are as well. But one of those things I want to highlight is that, in my opinion, and in many people's opinion, property taxes, but also taxes in general, are one of the ways that we actually generate community wealth. And so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about, but specifically kind of maybe highlighting the senior narrative that we hear very often at City Hall, and I'm sure other levels do. But just to start out, I want to give people a background of what we spend our money on. So the city has over $1 billion operating budget. We collect tons of money, and this is how we spend it. So the bulk of it goes towards police services, and this budget is based on what we're looking at in our upcoming budget. So it's kind of based on like a hypothetical 2024 budget if we're to move forward with it. So right now, the bulk of our spending is on police services, capital financing. So that's a lot of our capital projects are happening right now. We had the highest year of construction last year. So that's including all of the BRT, any community centers, any debt financing if we're paying off a project that we did a couple of years ago. The next thing is fire services, obviously. So like firefighters and their buildings, corporate services. So that's actually City Hall and our administration, roadways. So that does include, we don't separate out bike lanes and sidewalks. So that's kind of all of them together. But London is fairly sprawled, as you know. So we do have a lot of roads to maintain. And then you can kind of see the list goes down from there. So I just like to show that because I do think it shows kind of where we spend our money, what we prioritize. I also like to highlight a couple of these, and I'll go through quick, but London's the green line, and this is a historic situation. So London, Windsor, and Chatham-Kent are at the bottom of municipalities with a population of over 100,000 people of how much we collect in taxes. So the average is about 300 or 3,536. I know I just pay over 3,000. I think I got to 3,300 this year. So I'm just below the average. So it kind of depends on how much your house cost, of course. So if your house is worth over $1 million, you'll be paying far more in property taxes. My house technically is valued at 208,000. I bought it for 295,000. And if I was to sell it today, it would be worth 500,000 probably. But we base this on what we have at City Hall is what we're assuming your house is valued at. And those haven't been updated since 2016. Anyway, all to say, you can see London, we're on the lower end, both from the median and the average of how much property taxes we collect. You can also see as a percentage of household income, this isn't too big of a graph. So you can see London, like 3.5% of people's income is spent on property taxes. So for example, it's significantly less, as Durka was saying, significantly less than what you're paying in income tax. Although we're still expected to do significantly more infrastructure and community services work. So we are collecting a fairly low percentage of property taxes to maintain our services. As well, you can see commercial, again, Oshawa, Niagara, and then London have the lowest commercial tax rates. Same with industrial, Chatham, Kent, and then London. And then this I found interesting. I just want to share with you. So staff did a scan of other municipalities, and this was as of December of last year. Some of these have been approved or not approved, but you can see everyone's kind of struggling right now with cost increases across the board. So every municipality in Ontario is probably doing a tax levy more than what they historically have done, unless they're in a special situation. But for example, Hamilton, their tabled budget came in at 14%, and we know that Toronto, for example, I think is doing around 10%. So we are all kind of struggling with this affordability issue, including the municipality. You can see here, we collect 62% of the city's revenue is from property tax. So it makes up the bulk of how much revenue we have. The other areas, we get 25% from federal and provincial grants and subsidies, about 5% from user fees. So that's people paying for swimming or hockey or skate time. And then about 8% other municipal revenues. I can't really off the top of my head think of a good example of that, but you can just see that property taxes are the bulk of our revenue. And then I've been slowly collecting these, but these are graphs from some of our agency boards and commissions that demonstrate, given how much we collect from the property tax base, how much we give to them to operate their service. So the London Transit Commission in 2018, they were the lowest among their peers across Ontario. You can see we're just giving them over, looks like about 35% of their operating was our subsidy. That's the lowest. Windsor is a little bit higher, but they're next closest to us. And then they had an updated one in 2021. They're waiting for 2023 to come out soon. But again, London, it was just over 41%, but again, the lowest. So when you look at Waterloo, for example, it looks like they're maybe giving about 73% of municipal subsidy. So you kind of get what you pay for. So we're starving some of our agency boards and commissions of operating funds for them to provide a service. And as much as I'd say it's great to be as efficient and as effective as you can with your funding, that only goes so far. People can try to streamline things and try to make them as excellent as they can for as little money as they can, for as long as they can. But eventually the service potentially is just not what we want it to be because they don't have enough funding to do their job. You can also see the library per square footage. We're also giving the London Public Library the lowest subsidy per square footage compared to some other similar sized ones. So that's another one. So I've got a couple others, but those ones I thought were most relevant. But it's all the same situation. Most of our agency boards and commissions, when they compare themselves with their peers across Ontario, are getting some of the lowest municipal subsidies for their service. And then they're expected to either try to do the same amount of service for a less subsidy or find other funding mechanisms, which for the most part, they've done an exceptional job. But again, after decades of underinvestment, eventually you have to pay for the service that you want. So I want to talk really quickly about community wealth, and that's the concept, and I'm sure you're all very familiar of it, but the idea that if we're able to have a healthy and vibrant and supportive community that provides the services it needs for its population, we have community wealth. It's not based on how much you as an individual can generate in a capitalist model, but it's based on us all being able to support one another and thrive in a successful city. It's a bit utopic, but I think it's possible. So I want to give a couple examples of how I think if we invest in community wealth, which is how I see taxes as a way of redistributing income, there are savings for the community. So for example, if we invest in transit and more people are able to take transit because there's a route that was close by, or they only need to take one bus to get to work instead of two, and they might miss the second bus, that actually saves them money in the long run. So for example, in Canada, it's actually just under $13,000 a year to own a car. So that's if you're financing it. So if you buy a new one, you're paying it off, not a used one. A used one is obviously cheaper, but that's an average of $1,000 a month when you factor in insurance, gas, visits to the mechanic, financing, paying off the interest on it. Or you could get a bus pass for the entire year, the most expensive bus pass we have, which is $1,344. So you can see that's less than 10% of what it would be to, or no, just over 10% of what it would be to own a car. And when I was canvassing, I heard the story from people. I'd knock on the door, we'd start chatting, like, what are you worried about? And one person reminded me, so they live in my area, they're taking the bus to Fanshawe, they take two buses, they'd always miss their transfer because one would come late or come early. And so eventually after a year of doing that, and missing tons of class because of the bus system, they bought a car. And now I'm like, essentially, we've just saddled this student with like a $12,000 or $13,000, bill for the entire year, where they get a bus pass as a financial student. They didn't really have to pay for it because it's part of their fees, but they're not able to take it because it doesn't get them there on time. So in a way, we actually force people to go and buy cars and force them to take on financial burden because we don't have the community wealth, enough of a community wealth to be able to use transit regularly. Another example, some of these are a bit tongue in cheek, but like a library card is free. And in fact, you don't even pay fines anymore because the library is so cool that they decided to stop charging fines because it was disproportionately affecting people who had less income. If you go to Chapters or Indigo, but I'm sure none of us are, but if you go buy a book a month, that's about $360 a year if you're reading one book a month, which is on the low end for, I'm sure, a lot of people. Another example is affordable housing versus market rate. Again, a lot of seniors, but also anyone in any kind of economic system that's disadvantaged. Market rate is crazy right now. Again, in London, across Canada, in Ontario, one-bedroom apartment is $1,700 a month. If you do RGI, obviously it's 30% of your income. It's very hard to come by these days. Or if you can get into Indwell, it's $550 a month. But our issue here, again, is we have, so we've got 2,000 people experiencing homelessness. We have, I think it was over 6,000 on the affordable housing waiting list, although that number is constantly growing, and there's been people on there for 10 years. But if they were actually able to get into these either RGI or subsidized apartments, they wouldn't have to be, scrimping and saving and having to, take on roommates maybe when they don't necessarily want to, or living in really unhealthy situations. But we don't have enough affordable housing because, again, affordable housing, most of it is paid for from taxes. And we don't have enough taxes to be able to pay for enough affordable housing to meet the demand. And my last one is just, parks and ESAs. The access to them is free. You're allowed to go to the park. You're allowed to walk through the ESAs versus a gym membership, which, again, if you get the cheapest one for seniors at the Y, that's about $600 a year. So again, all these things that, we all pay in for, we all see the communal benefit for. If we don't pay enough, we don't have all these great resources available for the community. And when we do have them, it saves everybody money. And I think it's the hard part, though, when everyone looks at their budget as an individual, which makes sense. You're only in control of your own budget. But when you're able to, look at your costs and say, here's my rent, here's how much it costs to go to the gym, here's how much it costs to go to the grocery store, here's how much it costs for my car, and then you have to pay more taxes, it's hard to see eventually where do you see the point where you're actually making the savings. But I know at least for my household, we only have one car, and I'm able to take the bus. So we never bought a second car, so I didn't sell it and then make money back. But I've never had to make that additional $12,000 a year investment because the transit system works for me where I live. And I would like everyone who is able to take the transit system and willing and able to save, $12,000 a year to be able to do that. So that's the end of my presentation. Sorry if I went a little over time. I just started rambling. But the last thing I will also share is just, I don't know if you can see this screen. Here we go. I got it. Is I do have, and if you want to do this, I'm not sure if you did it at Thursday at Brendan's session, but I do have a chart that lets you see all the different business cases that we have, and then how much it costs and the percentage increase. And I can just quickly show you, if we did approve absolutely everything that is in a business case, and we approve the provincially legislated cases, if we did everything, it would come into about 9.15 a year, which is about additional $339 per person. I will be honest, I don't think this council necessarily has the appetite to go all the way. But I also even just pulled out some of the stuff that I thought you guys, when you're talking, environment, housing, all the housing ones, all the arts and culture ones, the washrooms downtown, I pulled those out. And that's just a 2.29% increase on top of the 4.9. So anyway, all to say, it'll be interesting to see what this council does, but these numbers are a lot for people on fixed incomes, but they're also not extraordinarily horrific. Another example is I read in the news next year or this year, people's grocery bills is going to go up $700 on average. So, this isn't even close to that. And not that I'm trying to compete with grocery stores, but all to say, some of these dollars, as much as 9% sounds scary, like $330 is 2 to 3 grocery trips for me. So anyway, I can absorb it. Not everyone can, but that is the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.